Before beginning the story, I'd like to say a big thank you for visiting my new channel. I'm going to be uploading alternate history-related stories every single day. If that sounds good, be sure to leave a like and don't forget to subscribe. It means a whole lot when just getting started. I hope you enjoy the story. I'd been doing elevator inspections for 11 years, which meant I'd stayed in a lot of hotel rooms, and the particular rhythm of checking into a place you'd never been and setting up for a 1 or 2 night stay had compressed into a routine so practiced it barely required attention. Bag on the luggage rack, toiletries in the bathroom, jacket on the hanger, phone on the charger. I'd read somewhere that forming consistent routines in hotel rooms helped with sleep quality on the road, and whether or not that was true, it had become the shape of my evenings. I emptied the nightstand drawer the same way I emptied it everywhere, not because I expected to use it, but because I didn't like unseen things in my immediate vicinity while I slept. Notepad, pen, hotel services binder, the Gideon Bible. I stacked them on top of the nightstand and plugged my phone in, and that was when the folded paper fell out of the Bible. It had been tucked between the pages near the back, folded twice, and it fell out when I set the book on the nightstand and landed on the carpet by the bed. I picked it up and unfolded it and read it, because reading a found document is an automatic response in most people, and I'm not an exception. It was a list, 12 items, handwritten in a small, careful print, the kind of handwriting that suggested the writer was used to making precise notations in limited space. No title, no date, no signature, just the 12 items, numbered. The first few were ordinary enough that I almost dismissed the whole thing as someone's packing list or personal reminders. Keep room key on your person at all times. Use the east stairwell, not the west one. The ice machine on the 4th floor will not be functioning. Then the list got stranger. Rule 7 said, if the elevator panel shows a floor above the top floor, do not press it. This is not a malfunction. Rule 9 said, the crossing lasts between 6 and 14 hours. It will end. Wait it out. Rule 11 said, the man in room 414 knows what is happening and is not safe to assist. He has been here before and intends to go through this time. I read the list twice. Then I folded it back up and set it on the nightstand and went to sleep, because I had a 7 o'clock start time on the elevator inspection, and the list, whatever it was not my problem that night. My name is Cass Holden, and I have certified elevators in hotels, hospitals, office buildings, and the occasional private residence for most of my working life. The work involves understanding the mechanical and electrical systems that move cars through shafts, the safety mechanisms that keep those cars where they're supposed to be and prevent them from going where they're not supposed to go. The inspection protocols that confirm everything is within tolerance. It's precise work and methodical work, and I find it satisfying in the way that methodical precision is satisfying when you're built for it. The hotel I was in was a 6-story commercial property with 2 elevator cars in a central shaft, standard configuration, last certified 14 months prior by a different inspector whose paperwork I'd reviewed on the drive over. Nothing unusual flagged in the prior inspection. Routine job, 2 days at most. I was in the shaft on the first morning, running the preliminary checks on car 1, when I noticed something about the top of the shaft that didn't match the blueprint dimensions I'd been given. The shaft ran higher than it should have. Not dramatically, not enough to be obvious from the outside, but the clearance above the car at the top floor was greater than the specifications indicated by about 3 feet. I measured it twice with different instruments and got the same result. I checked the blueprints again. The discrepancy was real. I marked it for follow-up and moved on to car 2, where I found the same discrepancy. I flagged it in my preliminary notes and went back to my room for lunch, and the folded list was still on the nightstand, and I picked it up and read Rule 7 again. If the elevator panel shows a flaw above the top floor, do not press it. This is not a malfunction. I put the list back down and ate my lunch. The crossing started at what I estimate was late afternoon on the second day, though the timing was gradual enough that I couldn't have pointed to a specific moment and said that was when it began. What I noticed first was the ice machine on the 4th floor. I passed it on the way back from the vending area, and it was dark and silent, the unit powered down, a small hand-lettered card on it that said, "Out of service." I was on the 4th floor, because my room was on the 4th floor, room 407. Down the hall from me, as the list had mentioned, was room 414. I went back to my room and picked up the list and read it from the beginning with the attention I should have given it 2 nights earlier. The 4th item said, "The hallway lighting will shift toward yellow before the crossing begins fully. This is normal." The lighting in the hallway when I had passed the ice machine had been yellow. Not a dramatic change, not a flicker or a malfunction, just a slight warmth to the overhead lights that hadn't been there that morning. The 5th item said, "Other guests will not notice what is happening. Do not try to explain it to them." I stood in my room with the list in my hand and thought about the shaft measurements and the ice machine and the hallway lighting and the careful handwriting of someone who had been in this room before and had wanted to leave something useful behind, and I made the decision to take the list seriously. The elevator panel showed 7 on the display at 4:45 in the afternoon. The hotel had 6 floors. The panel in the car, when I opened the doors to continue my inspection, showed the standard floor buttons 1 through 6, and below them, the lobby and the basement, and above the 6, in a position that hadn't been there that morning, a button labeled 7. It was not a malfunction. The button was clean and solid and integrated, not retrofitted, not added, not a glitch. It was a floor button for a floor that the building did not have. I stood in the car for a long time looking at it. Then I took out my inspection tools and opened the control panel in the car and started reading what the system was telling me. What the system was telling me was that it was receiving calls from 2 different configurations of the shaft simultaneously. The physical shaft I'd been working in, the one with the 6th floor configuration, and a second configuration that the system was registering as equally valid, a configuration with 7 floors and a different motor room position and a slightly longer cable run. Both configurations were real to the system. Both were sending operational data. The system was trying to respond to both sets of inputs at the same time, which was not something an elevator system was designed to do, and which was producing a stress condition in the drive mechanism that would, if left unmanaged, cause a failure. I sat down on the floor of the car and thought about what that meant and what I could do about it. Tova found me in the elevator lobby on the 3rd floor at what I think was early evening, though I had stopped checking the time because the time didn't seem to be behaving with full consistency. He was maybe 50, unhurried, wearing the specific, unremarkable clothes of a man who had packed for a trip with the intention of not being remembered. He looked at me sitting on the floor with my tools around me and the elevator panel open and said, "You're the inspector." I told him I was. He said he'd seen my truck in the lot with the inspection company markings. He sat down across from me, back against the wall, legs extended, with the ease of a man settling in for a conversation he'd been planning. He said he'd been here before. He said it the way you say you've been to a restaurant before, matter-of-factly, as context. He said the crossing happened at this location every few years, irregular intervals, and that he'd been in the hotel during a previous one and had waited it out the way the list in the Bible recommended, and that the waiting had been fine, but had left him with questions he hadn't been able to answer from this side. I asked him what questions. He said he had a daughter in the other world, not a version of his daughter, not a counterpart, his actual daughter who had crossed through during a previous event at a different location and hadn't come back. He'd spent 3 years trying to understand the mechanics of where she'd gone and how to follow her. He said this hotel was the cleanest crossing point he'd found, and that this event was the best opportunity he'd had. I looked at him. He had the quality of a person who had thought about something for so long that the thinking had become the structure of how he moved through the world, a long-term single focus that had worn everything else smooth. I asked him what his plan was for the elevators. He said the 7th floor button was the crossing point. He said during the active period, the car would complete the trip to a floor that existed in the other timeline, and that the trip was one way during the crossing. He said he'd been preparing for this for months. I told him about the drive mechanism stress condition. I told him in practical terms, without dramatizing it, what a failure of the drive mechanism during an active crossing period would mean for the 2 cars and the shaft and the people in the building. He was quiet for a moment. He said he hadn't known that. I told him I believed him. We worked on it together, which was not something I'd anticipated and which turned out to be necessary. Tove had a detailed understanding of how the crossing interacted with the building systems from his years of research, and I had a detailed understanding of the elevator systems themselves, and neither of us had the full picture alone. What we needed to do was separate the 2 configurations in the system's logic, allow each one to operate independently without the system trying to reconcile them simultaneously. This was not something the system was designed to do and required working at the level of the control software, which I could access through the inspection interface, making manual adjustments that told the system to treat the 2 configurations as sequential rather than concurrent. It took about 2 hours. Tove talked me through the crossing-specific behavior I'd need to account for, the way the system's inputs shifted during the active period, the specific points where the 2 configurations pressed hardest against each other. I handled the mechanical and electrical work. We didn't talk about his daughter during this time. We talked about the problem in front of us, which was the right use of both our attention. By the time we'd stabilized the system, the yellow light in the hallways had deepened, and the sounds of the building had taken on a quality I could only describe as doubled, each ambient noise carrying a faint echo of itself. as if the building was hearing itself from two positions simultaneously. I asked Tova if he was sure. He said he'd been sure for 3 years and that the certainty had only gotten more certain, not less, which he knew wasn't a reassuring kind of answer, but was an honest one. I told him to go then, before I thought about it long enough to say something that wasn't my business to say. He took the elevator. I watched the car go up, the indicator climbing through the floors. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and then continuing to 7. The indicator holding there for a moment. And then the car came back down empty, and the doors opened on the lobby level, and the car sat there, and the crossing continued without him in it. The crossing ended around what I believe was early morning. The yellow light resolved back to white. The doubled quality of the ambient sound disappeared. When I went back to the elevator shaft, the 2 configuration stress condition was gone. The system reading a single clean configuration. 6 floors, standard dimensions. The shaft measurements matching the blueprints. I went back to my room and slept for 4 hours and woke up in an ordinary hotel room on an ordinary morning with the list on the nightstand. I completed the inspection. Both cars were in good working order, all safety mechanisms within tolerance, the clearance dimensions now matching the blueprints correctly, the drive mechanism showing no signs of the stress condition from the night before. I wrote up the certification and signed it and submitted it through the company portal. I checked the hallway as I was loading my bag. Room 414 was empty, the door standing open the way housekeeping left doors open when a room had been vacated and cleared. The housekeeper inside was stripping the bed with practiced efficiency and didn't look up. I didn't ask about the previous occupant. I packed my bag and did the final walkthrough of my room, which I did in every hotel because leaving things behind was a risk of living out of a bag, and I'd learned early to be systematic about it. The list was on the nightstand where I'd left it. I picked it up and unfolded it and read it one more time. 12 rules, careful handwriting, the practical knowledge of someone who had been in this room during a crossing and had wanted to leave something useful for whoever came next. I thought about adding to it. I had information the previous writer hadn't had about the elevator system specifically, about the drive mechanism stress condition and the configuration separation procedure. It seemed like information worth preserving. But the list was already written, and the handwriting wasn't mine, and adding to it would change its character in a way I wasn't sure was right. I folded it back to its original creases and opened the Bible to the back pages and tucked it in at the same depth and angle I'd found it, visible enough to fall out when someone set the book down and looked at it wrong, which was the right level of hidden. Then I picked up my bag and checked out at the front desk and drove to the next job, which was a hospital on the far side of the county with 3 elevators and a certification overdue by 2 months. The work was the work. I did it.